Computer Programming for Kids, Step 4, Adding some Code. As promised, or threatened, in this step, we will add some code. Don't worry though, you will just copy and paste from here into your app, unless you prefer to type it in yourself, and I will explain along the way what the code is doing. With the Design tab of your app active, showing the Windows form with the controls we added to it in the last step, Step 3, on the form, double-click the Next button, which is circled below in the screenshot. When you do that, the code portion behind the form displays on the Form1.cs tab, and by double-clicking the button, it caused the button's on-click event code to be added. Although it is empty for now, that is to say it contains no code within the curly braces as of yet. This is how it should look. And in the newsletter you see a bit of code, event handler code for the button click with nothing in it yet. What you're seeing here is a code that will run when the button is clicked. As of now, nothing will happen, as there is nothing between the curly braces and thus no code to run. This is not really a problem. Having no code doesn't cause a problem, and it runs very fast. Give yourself a pat on the back if you got that joke. Anyway, onward. To remedy the no code runs because there is no code problem, add load next batch, left paren, right paren, semicolon, between the curly braces so that it looks like this. The new code is bolded, showing that code added to what was shown previously. You may see an error message now at the bottom of Visual Studio, which says in effect that it doesn't know what load next batch is. It doesn't recognize it. That's fine, don't worry about it. It's because Visual Studio doesn't know what to make of what you just added. It doesn't know what load next batch is yet. We will take care of that problem now. Follow these steps. 1. Locate the code that looks like this near the top of the page of code. And it shows a Form 1 with initialized component being called inside of it. 2, click to the right of the right curly brace. That ends that block of code, and hit the Enter key twice. You can now copy and paste the code below to where your cursor is, or type it in if you prefer that, but it'll take you quite a while. And in the newsletter, you'll see the entire load next batch method or block of code with that name. This is the code that will run when the next button is clicked, since it's called from that button event handler. Let's look at it and see what it does. The first line of code in it is sequence plus plus, semicolon. What's happening here is a variable named sequence is having its value increased by 1. That's what the plus plus does. It increases the value of the variable by 1. You might have noticed that you still get an error message at the bottom of the code window, though. That's because we haven't declared or added the sequence variable to our code yet. Note, a semicolon ends every programming statement in C#. It's similar to a period in human language, or a stop instruction in an old telegraph message. If you are a couple of 100 years old, you probably remember sending telegraphs. And if so, you are a super geezer. The point is, though, that semicolons are important. Without them, the compiler wouldn't know when you are finished writing your instruction in code, and the following bits of code will be taken out of context and quite possibly cause the program to be unusable until the semicolon is added. At the very least, the program will do things you weren't expecting it to do if you forget to put the semicolons at the end of your programming statements. So for this to make any sense to Visual Studio and to us, we must first add the sequence variable to the code. First, though, I will explain what a variable is. A variable is called that because its value can vary. That is to say, it can change. such as the temperature can and does change. Unlike the weather, though, you can change it. You are not a passive observer, but an active participant. There are 4 main things to know about variables. 1, they are of a specific data type. More on this later. 2, you must give them a name. 3, you can assign them values. 4, you can retrieve or access those values later. So let's add this variable. Type int sequence equals 0 semicolon into your code just below this part, and it shows the part of code to look for to add that declaration below. But above this part, and it has another block of code to look for. In other words, that part of your code near the top should now look like this, and the new code is bolded, and then it shows some code with this new line declaring the variable sequence in it. Do you recall that a variable must have a data type, a name, and that you can assign the value and later access that value? The variable named sequence that we just added is of data type int, int, which is short for integer. An integer is a number without a fractional element to it, or a fractional part. Examples of integers are -17, 0, 1, 2, 3, 19, 42, 10 million. These are all integers. They are integers as opposed to real numbers with fractions, such as 3.14. Now that I have mentioned 3.14, I'm hungry for pie. But then again, I'm just about always hungry for pie, so that's not saying much. And follows a picture of an apple pie with a line drawn through its diameter and some text talking about pi 3.14. The diameter times pi equals the circumference. Anyway, as was mentioned, the name of this integer variable is sequence. You can name your variables just about anything. You could name it Funky Monkey or Whoop Jamboree Hoo if you want to, but it's usually best to keep your variable names short and descriptive rather than whimsical and frivolous. The last part of the statement, equals 0, is the assignment of the value. It is assigned a value of 0. This isn't strictly necessary as an integer has a default value of 0 anyway, but it doesn't hurt anything. It makes it clear what you expect the value to be at the beginning before you change its value in code later. One last bit of code. We will add the same line of code that we already added to the button click event also to the form's onLoad event. In other words, when the form is loaded, when the app starts up, we want it to call the block of code named Load Next Batch. To add this code, go back to the Design tab and double-click anywhere on the form, but not on a control, on a blank area of the form. This will open up the Code tab again, form1.cs, with the following event having been prepared for the adding of code to it. And then the Form 1 load event is shown without anything in it yet. Go ahead and add the same code to it that you put in the button click event code so that it looks like this. New part bolded, which is the call to load next batch. Now the load next batch code, which you just added above, will run once when the form loads, and then again every time you click the next button. Each time the load next batch method runs, or block of code runs, the value of the sequence variable is increased by 1, or in common programming parlance, it is incremented. Note, to run the code you write in Visual Studio, either hit the F5 function key at the top of the keyboard, or select the Debug, Start Debugging menu item. If you ever have problems when trying to run your app, that is to say, it doesn't work right and or you get error messages, Google the text of the error message or describe the problem in your own words in your Google search, and you should get an answer on how to fix whatever the problem is. There are simply too many error messages that come up and problems that can and do happen to warn you about all of them as we go along. Again, the solution to all of them can be found by Googling and by debugging, but that's a topic for later. The bad news is that you will have problems with your code. The good news is it's nothing to worry about. You can always solve the problem by searching out the reason why it's happening and then fixing it. It might be a quick, easy fix, but sometimes it's not. Try not to let the problems frustrate you too much. It happens to everybody, and just as with life in general, you can overcome the problems, one at a time, if you persevere. See, programming can teach you life lessons too. In the next step, we will keep score by recording which selections the user makes and guessing their age, roughly speaking, based on those answers.